lead today's discussion, please welcome moderator Craig Spiesel.
Thank you, everyone. Hey, I really appreciate everyone joining today, and I think this session is going to promise to be one of the most interesting, colorful, and perhaps debateful topic. Lots of different perspectives we have, and I'm really fortunate to have with us today a really distinguished panel of experts. Katie Arrington, who's a CISO for acquisitions for Department of Defense, Andy Purdy, CISO of Huawei USA, Bruce Schreiner, security technologist, fellow at Harvard University, and others. And last but not least, Catherine Waldron, who's a fellow at R Street Institute. I also want to, by the way, if you're wondering what's going on the side, a good friend of mine, Summer Cordy, is a graphic recorder, and she's going to be capturing some of the key points and issues throughout the afternoon, and hopefully at the end we'll have a good graphic representation of the takeaways here. So this session's been kind of crowdsourced. I've received over 100 submissions, or I should say suggestions of points of what we should talk about. And again, we're focused on supply chain, but we're going to try in the next 50 or 60 minutes to go over these 5 points here. Talk about some of the complexity of the supply chain. How do you really keep it secure and resilient? Backdoors are a really big issue a lot of times, so we're going to talk about some of the myths and realities, I think. And then we're going to really drill into some of the issues that are top of mind in the news, and that is the issue of, is this a trade war, or is it an issue of critical infrastructure? And then I think we want to really drill down in the role of testing and some things the road ahead. I doubt we're going to have time for Q&A, but I do have several things that have been already submitted to us, and we're going to try to go through those. So these are some of the headlines. If you look at these headlines or any of the news, it has been a whirlwind. Different governments' point of view, confusing messages, conflicting, maybe even conflated here. So these are some things that makes this afternoon exciting, I think. So with that, to kick this off, I've asked each of our panelists to give a brief opening comment, and starting with Katie.
So good afternoon, everyone. I do apologize. I have a little bit of laryngitis, but I figured you'd all lump through it with us. I'm Katie Arrington. I'm the CISO for Acquisition and Sustainment over at DoD. So my job is to partially, I oversee the supply chain risk management for the Department of Defense, and that includes the DIB. So the supply chain is something that resonates with me. Thank you for inviting me on this lovely panel today, and I'm sure we'll have a very robust discussion.
Great. Andy?
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm particularly pleased that all 4 of the members of the panel are here today. As Art Coviello suggested yesterday, this is your time. It's critically important for the cybersecurity community to help America move forward. As we become increasingly dependent on ICT, it's more and more important, finally, that the U.S. walk the talk for cybersecurity. So I ask you some questions. What does history tell us about the importance of America's national security to the free countries of the world? Should the U.S. private sector lead a U.S. technology industrial policy? Because do we have a path forward for the U.S. to continue to lead in the competition for technology and innovation with China? By the campaign against Huawei's ability to purchase from American companies, who's more likely to be hurt, Huawei or the American companies that support the U.S. defense industrial base? And before Huawei's gear is ripped and replaced from the companies serving rural America, should experts consider the consequences? Should effective risk mitigation measures be considered? Will rip and replace take more time and more money than anticipated? What should the United States focus on that's most important for America? Are you willing to help America have a clear-eyed focus on national security and maintaining American competitiveness in the world?
Great, Andy. Bruce?
So, hi, happy to be here. I want to make 3 quick points about the general topic. First, supply chain security is an insurmountably hard problem. This is not, we can put backdoors in systems that cannot be found. We know that, especially if you control the hardware. And it's not just, do you trust the country in which the company whose equipment you have to trust is located, Right? This might be an American product, but this is not made in the US. Its parts don't come from the US. Its programmers carry 100 different passports, any one of which can subvert this system. When you think of supply chain, do not just think of the company. Worry about Apple equipment, worry about Cisco, worry about everything. And there is no way I, as a security engineer, can secure against a backdoor when someone controls hardware, software, and assembly. Second, there's a lot more to 5G security than supply chain. And 5G is insecure primarily because the protocols are insecure, because the governments, like the United States, like to use the systems to spy. And we do not have secure protocols. Some of them we inherited from 4G and 3G that are insecure, moving into 5G. We want to secure 5G, we have to do a lot more than worry about the supply chain. And third, tying national security to trade policy makes for impossible security trade-offs. Right? Either this is a national security issue, in which case there are things we do and we don't do, or this is a trade issue, in which case we negotiate on a variety of things. It cannot be both. It just doesn't work. So that's what I'll start with.
Great.
Oh man, I really want to get into that last statement you just made, but I'll save that for the rest of the panel.
I'm biting my tongue.
I'm Catherine Waldron. I'm a fellow at the R Street Institute in DC. We're a think tank. And man, I just want to address that, but okay, I'll wait. And just as an opening statement, I'll just say, I think all of us on stage can agree that supply chain security is a vital component of American national security, which means we get to then address the much more fun question of determining whether or not a company is a weak link in the supply chain, and then what do you do when a company is a weak link, and what justifies taking that link out of the supply chain entirely. And I think we're going to hear a wide variety of debate on that issue because supply chain is so context-specific. Not only do you have to take into consideration technical solutions, you have to take into consideration the pervasiveness of the infrastructure in question. You have to take into account the history and structure of the company in question and the history and legal structure of the company of origin, among many other factors. I think the United States has quite rightly raised concerns on all these issues, these factors about Huawei. But as we've seen the U.S.'s limited success, or perhaps not success, depending on how you want to quantify it in regard to their strategy of essentially kicking Huawei out of the global system, I think raises some questions in terms of, is that a good model for dealing with national security and supply chain security going forward? And I'm going to argue that no, it's not. And we need to have a much more holistic structure approach that not only looks at the risk of the moment, but then also what sort of policy implications, what sort of policies can we put in place that will have positive economic growth and will provide market competitors.
Great. Well, actually, I've just advanced a slide, and focusing on the 5G. I'm not sure if it's up there. It is up there. Great. Of the supply chain, I think it talks about everything here. And Bruce, I'm glad you mentioned standards because that's one of the challenges. So you look at, it's very complex. There's lots of components, lots of players, and each one of them has subcomponents or ingredients within them. So. Actually, Andy, I'm going to start with you here, give you the first chance. Again, we're going to try to keep comments to roughly a minute here. But again, Huawei is just one component of it, and you spend a lot of time working with carriers. What are some of the other risks from operators and such and other equipment providers as you look at the supply chain?
Well, I think we need to look at it kind of globally and from the U.S. perspective. What is most important to U.S. national security? And we saw in the recent issue of the DoD publication PRISM, an article by Tom Donahue I suggest that you all read about the worst possible day. We need to make sure that experts come together to look at that scenario because we believe there are other attack vectors that could be used. And we need to make sure the experts come together to consider those attack vectors. And we need to think about, well, are we going to one of Bruce's points, are we going to consider a vendor trusted because they're not headquartered in China? I don't think so. And I think as I've starting to learn from you all that we can't trust anybody. So that's the approach I think we need to take in addressing the risk.
Well, I actually want to jump in at Bruce, you wrote an article, I think it was in September, and I think it was a challenge building a trustworthy ecosystem from untrustworthy components?
Yeah, so actually this is something, I think this is a research question worthy of our industry. And I was going to close with that, but we'll do it now. Right, the internet was invented to answer a very specific question. Can you build a reliable network out of unreliable parts? The answer turns out to be yes. There's a similar question that would be great if we could answer. Can we build a trustworthy network out of untrustworthy parts? And I don't know if the answer is yes or not. Because we are going to be living in a world of untrustworthy parts. And they might come from China. They might come from another country. They might come from they might be Swiss crypto equipment. and yet we have to somehow get trustworthiness out of that mishmash. And I think that's a research question that is major DARPA funding level and something we should think about.
Right. Well, Katie, this is kind of in your wheelhouse a little bit. Your acquisitions for all Department of Defense.
Yep.
How do you secure everything?
Well, you buy down the risk and you buy up the uncertainty, right? You can't secure everything. But what you can do is when you have highly suspect, we have our own data. The recommendation was made to take Huawei out for a very specific reason. The law is the law. And we can sit here and juxtapose about all the things, right? But the law is the law. And in my job, I work at the Department of Defense. I'm going to enforce the law. When we have a known vulnerability, and that the compiled risk of everyone in this room, if you're a U.S. citizen, there is a compiled risk. And our job in the DoD is to make sure that you're safe, that we're doing our best to buy down the risk. And when we have our data, which we do have, which are reasons we are doing the things that we are doing, that is our way to buy down the risk. I hearken the room, we talk about 5G, right, and how compelling it is. I'm of the mindset it's not going to be that impactful to the Department of Defense as far as what primarily matters to me, which are my weapon systems, which is my critical infrastructure that I have control over. So we have a different mindset, obviously. But the challenge point with all the panelists on the room is we're the people that actually have to do it. And I couldn't in good conscience do it unless we took Huawei out. It's too much of a risk. We have much bigger things that we can focus on to buy down risk. Having this out of our most trusted environments isn't something that we in the DoD even are concerned it's an impediment. It's a have to do because the risk is so high.
Well, as expected, we'd have some different points of view here, and I'm sure Annie has some response to that. But we actually want to jump to this next slide, and we're really talking about one of the key questions here. And I'm going to go to the other end of the panel. Catherine you wrote also an article, as I recall, and it talked about, supply chain risk, is by judging a country of origin. Is that an appropriate metric? So that was about 3 months ago. I think you wrote that. Where are you? Have you changed on that? Is it any different?
So the piece I wrote, which was in response to the furor over TikTok, pretty much argued that the U.S. government should beware taking drastic action towards Chinese companies, which isn't to say there aren't significant national security concerns when it comes to Chinese companies. I very much believe there are. However, the point I raised in the article was that all the concern is frequently, what are they going to do with my data? China's going to take my data. They're building a database. We don't know what they're going to do with it. And we haven't really we haven't had an answer in the national conversation about what data constitutes the national security risk. And part of a reason we don't know is because we don't know how data is going to be used in the future. But without knowing the answer to that, it's also hard to judge the proportionate response to any particular company. So while I definitely agree with Bruce's point that we cannot just look at country of origin, you need to be equally suspicious of American companies, European companies. At the same time, I would also agree with Katie that country of origin for some companies and some infrastructure, there's just too high of a risk for us to be really comfortable with including them in our supply chain.
And we do all kinds of risk mitigation, to your point on that. Just because it comes from China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, always are looking at the source code, like first things first. Let's all go back to where the source code was created, who created it, and how has it been transmitted since then. I work on a great deal of that, part of my job, and I can tell you, companies think that they're doing risk mitigation practices, especially in software. They're woefully underestimating, because I use, when I talk about the CMMC and I go out and talk to people, I say everybody thinks when they walk out of the room in the morning, when they walk away from the mirror, they look great. Everyone assumes that the risk mitigation and the testing that I'm doing is good because I say I'm good. It's that when you put the mirror up and you say, yeah, no, you didn't draw your eyebrows on right today. It's a different game, and that's part of our problem. We have to look at these things. We have to look at them and not be country-centric. We need to understand what it is we want to be able to get out of it, what testing we say needs to be done to be able to use it so we can determine the risk.
Right. So actually, let me, speaking about eyebrows and fixing them, I mean, Bruce, I know you work on real hard as really the security technologist. I'm sure you have some views on this.
So I want to point out, to make sure you understand what the risk is here. The risk actually isn't spying. So remember the story of the African Union? African Union got a new headquarters, I think it was in Nairobi, and China built the telecommunications infrastructure. A couple of years ago, they discovered that every night all the data was being shipped back to Shanghai. Surprise. So that actually isn't the worry, because you'll discover that. If 5G routers are shipping copy of all the data back to China, we will find that out. And that's not what's going to happen. And it's not going to be some kind of traffic shaping BGR attack, because only the United States has the infrastructure to catch, to perform that and to get the data. It's going to be some kind of sleeper command that has equipment turn off or degrade when it's turned on. That's the worry here. That equipment, and right, the US is going to do this too, because it's such a good idea. Right, the equipment gets out into the world, and then we have the ability to control it when something happens. That's the risk. That's what we're concerned about. And that is extraordinarily hard to detect. Lots of competent engineers at this show can put in that back door, and it'll never be discovered. And this is what we have to worry about.
So let's jump to backdoors, and then I'm going to let Andy kind of maybe take the first. There's a lot of accusations, a lot of statements about backdoors, a lot of things. Sometimes, Bruce and I, we talked about the other day, is a vulnerability of backdoor if someone finds it. And so if people are making a lot of jumping to conclusions in a lot of this area. So Andy, perhaps you can provide some insights on this.
Well, let me use that as a basis to follow up on 2 points, and I'll frame them as questions. Is America ready for the worst possible day? Back in Hurricane Katrina, when everything was down, the question was, do you have satellite communications, some kind of satellite phone so you can communicate? Is America ready when our ability to communicate with our forces, both in the US and overseas, are degraded? Are we ready? And isn't it true that at least 5 nations of the world can virtually implant hidden functionality and backdoors in hardware and software? If those 2 things are true, please help America be safer. Help figure out how we can come up with uniform standards and conformance programs, testing, ongoing testing and continuous monitoring to help make sure we're safe.
So I don't disagree in the philosophy, but I can tell you, like the continuous monitoring, DoD, we're going to be doing it. We're doing it, right? How we communicate with our global partners. But when there is an exacerbated big risk, it's much easier to say, put this one off to the side, because we do have a multitude of others to deal with. And this is the problem, is that we have so many risks globally, internally, that we shouldn't be stuck on, we know this is a known big risk, and why. It has been, we have our data, we have our research. I don't know that anybody on the panel has classified, that can see classified information. I can tell you where we sit. There's a reason why we did what we did. So backdoors being what they are, that isn't the problem. It's when you are willing to convey control to another country is a problem in the United States, end of story, period. And if the origins of the particular product were wonderful and they were fraught with amazing pieces of democracy, I would say wonderful, but they're not. And I'm not willing to risk it. And it's obvious by law, by legislation, by executive order, there are much higher people that agree with this.
Andy?
I encourage the experts there because I do not believe America is ready for the worst possible day. And I hope we will concentrate on trying to address those risks to make sure that America is ready to respond when we have to. I do not believe that right now we are ready, and I hope we will focus some of the experts in this community to help make sure America is ready.
You know, our only hope now is like, you know, our stuff won't work, but like their stuff won't work either. Right? So like the hope is that we are just so embedded in their supply chain that like nothing's going to work. I think that's probably our best hope for the worst possible day.
Well, I guess on that note, we're kind of advancing the next slide here is I think that's already happened a little bit in some other areas. So I guess, you know, and I'm going to go to Catherine on this one, you know, in a sense, you know, the headlines about the U.S. infiltrating, compromising products, Cisco routers that were being shipped to Syria, NSA with RSA here. Many of you may remember, I think it was 2003.
You should have put up that picture that we could all see classified information.
Yeah. So, you know, is this the pot calling the kettle black?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, yes. All countries are engaged in spying through various different means. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. But to get back on the issue of backdoors, which I thought was interesting and which I did not get asked on.
We can go back to that.
I want to go back to that, what you just said.
Yeah, okay. But I think one thing to keep in mind, which isn't typically mentioned in the context of supply chain in regards to backdoors, is how other conversations going on in regards to backdoors in the policy world could have interesting impacts on the supply chain side of it. There's been a resurgence lately, I think, in the going dark debate in regards to backdoors and whether or not the U.S. government should essentially require companies to build in backdoors for the sake of law enforcement and child exploitation online, which is a very noble cause. But I think we need to be aware of how encouraging backdoors in that policy debate could therefore lead to terrible precedents in regard to building backdoors that could be vulnerabilities in the supply chain debate. And so just because you think you're having two different policy discussions doesn't mean you're not going to accidentally end up somewhere where you've compromised both of them.
So I want to fundamentally go back to a point you just
I was going to get Bruce, and then we'll let you.
Okay. So I think this is important, right? And this is the way I have to think about it. One internet, one world, one answer. You know, if we are going to be, as a country, saying that, you know, security is paramount, then we need to build systems that are secure and no one gets to spy, right? Either no one gets to spy or everyone gets to spy. What the U.S. likes is this, we get to spy and nobody else does. And that's a great position, and it was fun to have for a while, and we had the tech chops to do it, but those days are over. If we're going to champion a secure 5G system, I guess 5G is too late, a secure 6G system, we're going to recognize that security will come at the expense of surveillance. And that'll be surveillance for China and surveillance for the United States. If we like the fact that we can use the cellular network to spy our adversaries, then they get to spy on us. Pick one. You can't have both. Just pick one.
So with that, the point that you made, I don't know that at this community they quite get the cultural shift in the Department of Defense.
Oh, probably not.
Okay, so there's a big... So,
we're not DoD people in this community, just saying.
We have changed culture in the past 18 to 24 months, where security has become foundational, right? You either build it on a secure environment because... as secure as you can at the time, because cost, schedule, performance do not matter in an unsecured environment. It doesn't matter if you deliver something in the supply chain at the approved cost or at the performance that you agreed upon or the schedule, if you get it and it don't work, right? Your adversary has it, your competitor has it. The point that I was going to hit on with what Catherine said was, it's really interesting when you bring up we do it to each other, right? But capitalism is a beautiful thing, right? So that what one product vendor in the United States or a product vendor in the UK or a product vendor in Australia, they have a disparate mission. Theirs is not unified. It is not with a 5-year global plan to take economic domination over. It's not to take away human rights. It's not to prevail communism for the most part. So, yes, you do have to assume some risk in your supply chain. You always will. Nothing will ever be 100% secure. We know that. But when you have a product that could take over, run, manipulate the most critical things in our country, why would you not want to be sure that company has all the right philosophical endeavors, to which they don't, period. You can talk all you want, right? You can talk about, will you make this trade-off? Will you make that trade-off? I don't want to be in a world, to your point, Andy, where I wake up one morning and the banks don't work, and the traffic lights don't work, and break down. I want to make sure that that control remains here,
So
where I
Katie-
can touch you.
But Katie, is it true or is it not true that at least 5 nations of the world have the power to virtually implant hidden functionality in hardware and software and launch later a virtual attack?
Which 5?
That is not, so it's...
Is that true?
Of course it's true. Which 5? Probably 30, probably 50.
That's
Which 5?
ridiculous.
Okay.
I'm just asking if 5 are true. I'm told
This
it
is
may be
turning
6.
into like-
but-
Which 6? Right? U.S., U.K., Russia, China, Iran. Who do you got?
But the bottom line is we're a democracy. We're different.
So I'm going to ask a little different question there, and we're not picking on you.
That's
We love
all right.
you here. But, France, the UK, the EU, and I'm not sure the status of Germany, they've said, hey, we're willing to manage the risk and accept Huawei in certain parts of our infrastructure. And supposedly, they've been shared the same intelligence data that you've been shared. So this gets into the confusion headlines, is how much of this is being influenced by a trade issue, or is it bona fide security?
Put me in a bar. But, I work in the Department of Defense. There's only so much I am actually responsible to talk about. Katie Arrington, on the other side, I could answer that question, but as a DoD employee,
Okay.
I can give you this answer. Period. End of story. It's law. We uphold the law in the Department of Defense. Your senator, your congressman, and your president all had a reason to do what they did.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you look at the news, the administration is trying to get played both ways. And I think this hurts us. It's probably a national security issue, but we talk about it like it's a trade issue. And I think we really hurt ourselves with our allies, when we try to play both ends of that. So maybe on stage, maybe for you it's a national security issue, but coming out of the White House, there's a lot of talk of it being a trade issue. And I wish they would stop doing that. Or at least if they are doing that, stop talking about it as a national security issue.
Well,
Pick one.
But if you want to go down that road, right, China has been blatantly ignoring IP law. They have blatantly been taking whatever they want. And you can't have it both ways, right? You can't have your IP and your data rights be yours and then give it to a country who takes it, mimics, copies, undersells, underbids you continually. Yeah, you can't have it both ways,
So
right?
now you're talking trade war.
It's not a trade war.
You just said that's undersells, underbids is all trade war talk. That's not national security talk.
It's national security. So when
Why
I
am I
develop a
defending China?
capability and the IP is in the Lockheed
So-
Martins of the world, I disagree.
Well, I'm glad we're at least expressing how we feel here. And like I said, I can guarantee this is going to be a colorful discussion, but we're just warming up, by the way. So, so if you thought the presidential debate the other night was wild, I think we're heading to that here. So,
But Craig, let me make a point. If the point is true, and maybe it's 30 countries, but if it's possible to virtually implant hidden functionality, then the issue of saying, okay, we're blocking Huawei equipment, that solves the problem? That doesn't solve the problem. We need to make sure we can find the bad stuff in all the products. And we hope this community can help give us
And
that
we
level.
are 100% supportive. So I am all in on everything, but there is just a major risk with this one particular thing. We should have the discussion about what does supply chain risk look like? What does risk mitigation look like? Understanding that risk does not commute what my risk is, it's not what your risk is, it's a different paradigm, that we can have 100% have that 100% conversation. Because it is absolutely needs to be. But this, the Court of Appeals held it up. It ain't changing. So let's move forward.
Our point's basically, yes, this won't solve the problem, but it solves like an easy piece of the problem. And I mean, that's a plausible argument, and I would buy that. I think we have a bigger problem. We don't have many alternatives. I mean, I'm actually curious what you're buying instead. Because, I kind of think 5G's lost, and our only hope now is to try to secure 6G. So good luck, and I hope you can do it. I'm rooting for you, but I'm not optimistic.
So I think this kind of gets
Who are you
to
rooting for?
I'm rooting for that you can build a Huawei free 5G network.
Why would I have to build a 5G network? When did the Department of Defense ever build a network?
All right. Then
So when you say,
I'll root for some magical thing happening where you get it.
well, how did you get it to begin with?
I don't know. I'm not DoD saying no Huawei in my network, but it's not going to be. There'll be an empty box where the equipment used to be, and there'll be air there. There'll be something there.
You can have routers and switches from other countries, yeah?
Yes, that's
okay.
the
And how
other country
much
stuff.
dependency do you think I really have on the 4G networks or the 5G networks?
Are you on 3G still? I don't want to know. Don't tell me. Okay, all right. Don't tell me how bad
so
it is.
let's go
Don't
to the next.
assume.
Don't tell me how bad it is.
We're going to go to the next topic here, and I think this is one of the things that I think everyone can maybe take something away with. I'm hopeful. It's about objective criteria and testing.
Yes.
So whether it's Huawei, whether it's Ericsson, whether it's Cisco, whether it's Nokia, so I believe that we should have objective criteria. And if you look at the NIST framework and different things, what can companies measure against? What could countries measure against? And so I think one of the challenges that at least I see is we don't know what those criteria that people are making conclusions on. And so this is one of the areas that we need some help on, I think. And how do we make this judgment? And based on your risk appetite for your application, obviously for critical infrastructure it might be one thing, but an in-home IoT device may be a different set of criteria. So, I know, Katie, you've been working on a certification framework. We're running on time, but a short update on that and what can be leveraged and what can be shared that we can test. Because if we're going to plug in, like Bruce said, if we're going to plug in Cisco or Ericsson, how do we make sure they're at this based on the level playing field, the same criteria?
So first, CMMC is rolling out as scheduled, meeting all the marks. It'll start showing up in the department. Oh, sorry, I forgot. CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification that the DoD is running out. It is based on the NIST. It is based on ISO 27001. It is based on controls the UK has implemented, that the Australians have had. We took the best of breed. We brought them together. We worked with industry, academia to figure out what were the controls, the capability that we wanted, the outcome, and put it in a model that we could trust but then verify, right? So we have created a model to go out and then have the companies that work within the DoD supply chain get certified that they are ready, willing, and capable to do the work that we need them to do.
Would you let Huawei go and apply their products to that same criteria?
It's against the law. Why are you asking a silly question? I don't understand listen, if we really want to have a discussion about how we can get good on our supply chain because it matters, let's have a conversation. But this is a moot point. The law is done.
But it's an interesting hypothetical he's saying.
Thank you.
It's right. That's the point. It's an interesting hypothetical. I understand it's illegal. If it were legal, would that be something reasonable? It's a good question.
So it's the testing and the standards. So even Huawei can admit, their programmers are where Microsoft was 25 years ago, right? They're not incredibly robust. They don't have you can listen.
What is a robust programmer?
Your job, Andy, it's your job. I get it, right? That's what you work for, and I get that. But I go by what I read the analysis, and I can say, peace. What we have to do is determine what are the standards and requirements for testing a product, right? This is where we really have to get good. We don't have we're doing the CMMC for companies to get critical thinking around security, around what and why they're doing it. We don't ask ourselves often, why do we do two-factor authentication? Why is that needed?
We ask ourselves that all the time.
Why? Because my husband knows my first password. Two-factor means that there's a redundancy built into the system, that you have to have more. But think why we do it. When it comes to product, we have to get to that same level of rigor of testing. The second part to this is once you go through the rigors of testing, you continually have to do penetration testing. You continually have to test that product because no enterprise network, no environment stays static. It will continually change. It's changing at the speed of light. So we have to have the tools in place to buy down the risk as it continues to evolve, but understand, baseline, underwriter laboratories, we need standards, we need to impart them, we're using them, but we need to do more beyond that static test.
So Bruce, we spent a lot of time in the past talking about IoT devices and how do you test them. And so you think about today, it's like, okay, so Department of Defense have their criteria, but there's, to the best of my knowledge, there's no single federal agency. So should there be like an independent testing of some of this? So
I think independent testing makes sense, but there's testing against errors and bad practices, and there's testing against malicious activity. I mean, if your testing is robust, then the devil himself should be able to send a product through it. If your testing is not robust, then it's not robust. And we have a problem. I worry a lot about we are talking about intelligent, adaptive, malicious adversaries. We're not testing whether this table can take so much weight. I mean, we know about how hard it is to find a back door, how they can be put in. And this is not something we're going to find through underwriters lab-like testing. We'll find things like default passwords and bad coding practices and stuff that will imply vulnerabilities that can be found and exploited, but not deliberately inserted things. And so there are very different kinds of animals. I really worry about being able to test for the former. I don't think you can do it well.
I think that we kind of, coming back to the RSA theme of human technology. So is the risk going to be more of the human factors? Is it going to be more of the rogue employee, the operator that has the ability? So it's not the device itself, it's those who's operating it. Andy, do you have
I think Catherine hasn't had a chance. Did you want to weigh in?
Oh, I'll weigh in on this, sure.
Okay. So I really applaud after the work.
I won't weigh on.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. I misunderstood you.
No worries. Absolutely. I think you're right that independent testing would certainly be beneficial. Obviously, in the case of Huawei, the UK has tried to take steps in this direction, not always to the benefit of Huawei since they've discovered plenty of bugs in the system. But in regards to the appetite for that in Washington, certainly for Huawei, it's illegal in regards to getting that reversed or modified in any way. I don't think it matters because at this point, because of Huawei, in the minds of policymakers in Washington, China is now, tech companies from China is now synonymous with the name of the Chinese government. And I don't think you're going to find that they're not going to undo that, regardless of how much testing they go through, I think.
So let me suggest, and in a statement and question I asked from the floor of a panel yesterday to Admiral Blair, who was talking about the Huawei CSEC UK program, and I suggested that that's really focusing on just the product, and that's important. But what our customers have recommended to the FCC is a three-legged stool. So it's not just the products. It's also got to be the customers and carriers and what they do for cybersecurity, how they promote resilience, how they manage the networks in terms of anomalous activity. Hopefully, as part of legal information sharing with the government can then connect the dots. The third leg of the stool is whether and how and when the equipment supplier accesses the customer networks and the customer data and does updates. So there you need what we do, and we're open to doing it better. We have specially configured laptops, so every time we touch the customer network or data, after written permission, every keystroke is logged. So it's fully reconstructed. The information is owned by the customer, and we're not saying it's perfect, but hopefully all the telecom operators are doing that, and that's the kind of thing in these three legs, if we can get input from the community, and I've got some suggestions on transparency that can help us move forward to address risk and promote resilience.
Catherine, do you want to follow up on that, or?
I mean, I think that's great. That's not going to help you guys.
So I just got a reminder that we should take a quick look and see how Summer's doing on the side there. If she's capturing everything there, I think they want to catch that on camera. Are they going to do that?
It's less ranty than we were.
Well, at least she hasn't done the caricatures of you and I this year, Bruce. So we're in better shape so far there. So Summer's really doing a good job. So it's interesting to be the key points here we're collecting here. So, I guess, do we risk this false narrative? So, okay, we've blacklisted Huawei, but are we going to do the same robust through every other component in there? And if not, are we just going to have a false sense of security? And, Bruce, I'm going to let you take that one.
I remember what the first sentence I said when I got up here. Supply chain security is an insurmountably hard problem. It is not just the country, it is the equipment, it is the program, it is the assembly, it is the shipping, it is the update. Right? We have fake apps in the Google Play Store. We had a Cisco box sent for the Syrian telephone company, the NSA intercepted. NotPetya is being distributed through a fake update to a popular Ukrainian accounting package. We can go on and on and on. And you can build a US-only iPhone, it'll cost 10 times as much, nobody will buy it. Our industry is deeply and irrevocably international in ways that make this impossible to solve. Now, that's not fun, but that's the world we're in. So now, what can we do given that? Right? I said that my only hope of hostilities erupting the US and China is that our stuff will fail, obviously, but hopefully their stuff will fail too. Nobody goes anywhere, and everything is down to a halt. That's my best scenario, because offense is so much easier than defense here. So I worry about it.
In the supply, so you're the supply chain. You're absolutely right. Like this, and it's like security. Like you'll never be 100% secure because it will constantly change, right? But you buy down your risk. One of the things within our supply chain that I think that and the coronavirus has, I think, illuminated it. And we talked briefly about this beforehand. Is how impactful it is to how impactful that is to everyone's supply chain, not just DoD, like everybody's supply chain. We have to start thinking about what the risk is in the supply chain. You can't solve all the problems. You have to prioritize what are your biggest challenge points in it to work to secure those as best as you can and move down that path, because you're never going to be able to boil the ocean. I mean, you're 100% right. It's a big challenge.
Let's pivot. The U.S. government has multiple efforts on supply chain security. One, with Department of Commerce under NTIA is the SBOM, software bill of materials, and the whole concept between that is think of the nutrition label, what goes into all of your products. So the idea is it may be safe today, but as you're building that into your infrastructure, does that software library have a vulnerability tomorrow? And I think that's a good concept. And I know NIST is also doing a supply chain initiative. So there's multiple government agencies. But I think that's just another thing. It's not just the device. We need to look at there's multiple layers of that. And does anyone have any response
Well, let me make a suggestion. First of all, I didn't finish making the point commending DoD. We were working hard when I was at DHS. We launched the Software and Supply Chain Assurance Forum years ago, co-led by DoD, DHS, NIST, and GSA. The effort to try to create risk-informed procurement requirements that would stick. Now, in the recent time, it looks like DoD has a new effort to really not just make sure this stuff gets funded, but actually make sure it's with assurance. And I think that's a very good effort. So when we look at the three-legged stool, the community hopefully can help. DHS and this, we're trying to get greater capabilities to monitor the carrier networks, to find anomalous conduct. We need to do a transparency initiative. Have DoD, have the NSA Cyber Collaboration Group, have some of the telecoms and U.S. Telecom call on the equipment suppliers to come in, open up the kimono, and tell you what is it we're doing on software supply chain, on internal testing, on product development, and on software engineering. Have those discussions. Nothing asked in return. That's one. Two, call on the equipment suppliers to create industry minimum best practices for assurance and transparency. And third, and I know we might not agree to this, but why don't folks say what is necessary for the community to go into the factories and the development of companies like Huawei, Nokia, and Ericsson? What's necessary to go in so you can build transparency, you can build assurance, we can have measures that you have a basis for confidence?
So, I think one of the things that takeaways we think about this, it's not just for 5G, but what tools are there to help companies, enterprises, better understand their risk? And so the SBOM was one of those areas. And I think as we look at that, there's multiple government efforts. And so I think as a takeaway, I think industry is looking for those best practices so they can do their own risk assessment. Not that they may not agree with yours, but I want to make it based on my risk appetite. And I think that's one of the challenges is carriers, and I've spoken to them, they don't have that criteria. They want to be able to do it as robust or even more robust than the Department of Defense. But they don't have a playbook to work from. Yeah. So on that comment,
I'm nodding because I was in a meeting once with people from a major telecoms carrier, and I asked them about supply chain, and the answer I got back was, yeah, we just kind of like feel it out. And I found that answer to be incredibly alarming, obviously, from the national security perspective. But there are resources out there. Certainly there's things like the NIST framework, and NIST is working on frameworks specifically in regards to supply chain. But I do think we need to be concerned about how often carriers and other companies are auditing themselves or being audited. And the issue that we see with frameworks and other checklist type programs is that suppose you check all your boxes, you think you're secure, well, great, like you said, we're secure for today. But if it can lull you into a false sense of compliance. So that is something that we need to essentially watch out for when encouraging the adoption of other frameworks and checklists and supply chain auditing.
I agree with Andy on the point, though, that we need to do more about baking security protocols and being very clear and concise on the very get-go on what it is we think is a requirement. You cannot deny that. I think the DevSecOps, I mean, as we move through that, I think it's hugely beneficial to see that, where we're going. We're baking security in. The control of the repositories is, I think we have to also look at as well as we develop in this environment that, whatever we house them in the cloud instantiations, who's watching over that, who's protecting those crown jewels for companies, for NSA, for anybody. I mean, that's part of it. But rolling security in at the base level at the start, building on top of it, being clear and concise about the requirement that you need for your particular company. I mean, the DoD is just one sliver of this. Granted, we're the largest buyer in the country, but on the other side, we do need better requirements. We are working on that. That's part of, 20 years ago when a lot of weapon systems were developed, things, I mean, you were there. Was the world the same at all?
So I want to, we were joking before about this void. If you rip out Huawei, what do you have? And one of the challenges has been China's been out innovating the U.S. in many areas. This is not new. It's happened. Huawei, right, wrong, or indifferent, they're able to come to the market 6 to 12 months before anyone else with more innovative products. So the question, and maybe this, Bruce, because you had actually posed a question to Katie, so I'm going to point this to you, is should the U.S. be investing more to spur innovation and incentives? And that said, in context, according to the Wall Street Journal, they already invested $50 billion in tax incentives to Cisco.
I don't think it's possible. I think we are too international for that. And that even if the tax incentives go to Cisco, the boxers are not built in the U.S. And they're not going to be, that's going to cost too much. We as a country are not willing to pay the price for the security that we think we need. You talked about software bills of materials. I think those are great, but those are not going to solve these threats. Software bill of materials solves, Heartbleed shows up, and what of my equipment is dependent on that protocol? Am I vulnerable? Right? That's what that solves. That's really needed, especially with IoT, because stuff's coming from libraries into libraries into libraries, and you don't know what you have in your equipment. But that's not against a nation-state threat. And nation-state threats are largely above the pay grade of companies. Right? Just ask Sony, ask Maersk, ask the Brazilian oil company the NSA hacked. This is, right? These are not going to be the threats these companies can deal with. As a nation, as DoD, we kind of expect you to deal with those threats, right? That we kind of outsource that to you, and that's probably the right way to do it. But we're not going to build a U.S.-only capability here. The only country that might be able to go it alone is China, because they're big enough. Russia's trying, they can't. India can't. Europe can't. We can't. We are all, oddly enough, too small.
Anyone want to follow up on that comment at all about innovation investment?
So we are investing in innovation, without a doubt, right? But we do look to industry, and the Department of Defense has always looked to industry to come up with innovation because we are the Department of Defense. Our job is to defend. Innovation, we need to make sure that as we go forward, that we're putting the right resources after the right technology, not trying to go after things that are already been breached. And the comment that you made is, that China can bring it to the market. They build it better. Well, build it better. Well, because you based it on my work, like a lot of my work, right? Let's be really honest. It's a lot of my tax dollars that have gone into this that our adversaries have kind of stolen and then built upon it. So, yeah, they can do it cheaper, right? They don't have to build and know how to build a Navy
shouldn't be
warship.
relevant for this conversation. That's the trade war part.
It isn't, but it is. But what are you willing to sacrifice? We lost 70 years worth of naval intelligence and design.
I know, but lots of things are true but aren't relevant to this 5G supply chain discussion. I get that 5G, we're annoyed and getting even is good.
You keep looking for the DoD to solve a problem.
It's a defense problem. It's your name.
Maybe we need to do an audience poll here.
Who owns 4G? Does the Department of Defense in the United States own it? No.
Then why did you rely on it?
I said, I'm not going to put it in my networks. I'm not going to put it in the stuff that I'm responsible for. Period.
So why am I defending China again?
So I would say block Huawei if you must, but we need to do a whole lot more to make America safer and make America more competitive in the world. I think it's great that the U.S. government is starting to focus on ICT. That's great. And to the extent that the U.S. government can help create greater competition among equipment providers, the world will be better off. But we've got to have experts who can come up with some ideas, such as if the U.S. needs its own telecom equipment provider. Why in the world wouldn't the U.S. call Huawei's bluff for the offer to license our 5G technology? Why wouldn't you at least have those conversations? And why don't you think about ways that the experts could say, you guys want to come into Huawei's facilities and Ericsson to deep dive. What can be done? How can third parties monitor what's happening in the actual creation and manufacture to make sure that we know what we're doing and there's independent transparency? Make requests to the companies of what can be done to add the kind of level of trust that's not there now. But to simply stand silent and not make demands and requests on the equipment providers doesn't help the situation.
So we're going to go to, I think
I'll agree with that.
It's a good point for maybe a wrap-up lightning round of comments there. And Katie, again, looks like they're beating up on you here, but maybe...
We don't mean to, though. You're, like, on the good side.
I am on the good side, right? Listen, I came here today because sometimes you just got to say the truth, and you just got to hold the line. And then when you do that, and then the right behaviors become normal, what you desire, Mr. Purdy, becomes a reality. But unless you're willing to draw the line and say, I can't move off of this, you're going to have to do something better. We all have to do better. 1,000%. Everybody. And I think that this event has brought to light what we want. Where do we want to go? What is the expectation for supply chain? What is the expectation for security? Because it came up on all of us. Everyone in this room, technology snuck up on us. It came. We didn't put the tools in 20 years ago, did we? Yes or no? I mean, no. So it came. We got it. We've got to get better. But this is the event that made us kind of wake up. Okay, to have that kind of dialogue going future, now we see it as a must. Absolutely must. But where I am today and where I'll be in 10 years is a different story, right? Today I have to buy down the risk for what I know is a problem. I have to protect you as a nation. That's our job. The men and women that sign up to volunteer to protect your lives, protect your freedom. My job, the SecDef, our job, Ms. Lord's job, is to do the best thing that we can do at the right moment, at the right time, to protect the warfighter and the national defense.
Great.
Can we do better? Yes. Will we? Yes.
Bruce, closing comment?
So we didn't do the right thing 20 years ago, and I actually will lay the blame a lot on the NSA for that, because that was back when we had an advantage in spying on telecom networks, and we wanted to keep it. And yeah, we did a lot of things bad to make these protocols insecure. We can do things here. They are going to be expensive. I do not believe that we have the appetite, whether it's the military, the government, industry, anybody, to spend the money on secure devices, on devices that have the kind of supply chain security that would make a difference. We're not. And until we are, we're not going to get it. We can complain, we can wish for things, but it's not going to happen without real funding. And it's not funding the market's going to provide. Market doesn't care. This has to come from the top because it's fundamentally a national security problem. And this is how we solve these collective action problems. And until that happens, this is all going to be talk and panels and not going to be security. And that's sad.
Catherine?
I mean, it is a national security issue. It's, to many people, an economic issue. And I think, we've debated the whole time, like, is this trade or is this national security? And the unfortunate answer is it's both. And it depends on who you're talking to as to which one they're going to prioritize. And part of the reason that we are in this situation with China and 5G is that for so many companies over the past 20 years, their answer has been, I'm going to prioritize the economic aspect and not the security aspect. And so if we really are, screwed when it comes to 5G and we want to think about securing 6G, then we need to spend an awful lot of time about thinking, how did we end up in the spot where we are now?
Great. Well, I just want to wrap it up here. And I think looking ahead, I'm not sure if that slide's up there, I think hopefully we can learn a lot by this. Hopefully that we can apply the same rigor and to other areas and other components, other operators, and look at how do we improve resiliency. It's not guaranteed there. And on a note, I understand the administration is pulling together thought leaders at the end of April or beginning of April on 5G, and so maybe some of us can be part of that discussion here. And again, I want to thank the panel for their insights. As I promised, this would be colorful, and I think different points of view, and hopefully we delivered on that. And so thank you again, and thank you everyone for your insights today.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.